The dirt on Clara Jensen's hands never seemed to wash clean, no matter how hard she scrubbed, and as she knelt beside the water pump behind the Silver Spur Saloon in Jefferson, Texas, she wondered if perhaps the stains had seeped into her very soul. It was August of 1878, and the heat pressed down on her shoulders like an iron weight as she wrung out the filthy rags she'd been using to clean the saloon floors since dawn. The other girls who worked inside, the ones with painted faces and bright dresses, passed by her without a glance, as though she were nothing more than another piece of discarded furniture left to rot in the Texas sun. Clara had arrived in Jefferson 6 months ago, with nothing but the clothes on her back and a heart full of desperate hope. She'd fled from Louisiana after her father died, leaving her alone with debts she could never repay, and men who thought a 19-year-old woman without protection was easy prey. Jefferson had seemed like salvation when she first glimpsed it from the steamboat on Big Cypress Bayou, the waterway that connected this inland port to the rest of the world. The town bustled with commerce, cotton, and opportunity, or so she believed. But opportunities, she quickly learned, were reserved for those who had money, connections, or at least a respectable reputation. Clara had none of these things. She'd taken the only work she could find, cleaning and scrubbing in the saloon, where decent women wouldn't dare set foot. The owner, a cruel man named Horace Grimm, paid her barely enough to rent a tiny room above the seamstress shop and buy stale bread from the mercantile. The saloon girls treated her with contempt, seeing her as beneath them despite their own questionable status in society. The patrons ignored her completely unless she happened to be in their way, at which point they'd shove past her or kick over her bucket of wash water for sport. Clara had learned to make herself invisible, to move through the world like a ghost. She kept her dark blonde hair pinned tightly beneath a worn kerchief, her gray eyes downcast, her movements quick and efficient. She never spoke unless spoken to, and even then, she kept her words brief and deferential. It was safer that way. In a town like Jefferson, a woman alone had to be careful, had to avoid drawing attention that might bring trouble. But loneliness was its own kind of death, slow and suffocating. At night, in her small rented room, Clara would kneel beside her narrow bed and pray. She'd pray for strength to face another day, for protection from those who might wish her harm, and sometimes, in her most vulnerable moments, she'd pray for something she hardly dared name, someone who might see her, truly see her, not as a piece of furniture or a target for cruelty, but as a person worthy of kindness, of respect, of perhaps even love. She knew it was foolish. Women in her position didn't get fairy tale endings. They got older, more worn, more invisible, until one day they simply disappeared entirely, forgotten by a world that had never cared about them in the first place. Still, Clara prayed because prayer was free, and hope, however fragile, was sometimes all that stood between a person and absolute despair. The sun was beginning its descent toward the horizon when Clara finally finished her work for the day. Her back ached from hours of bending and scrubbing. Her hands were raw despite the calluses that had formed over months of hard labor, and her stomach growled with hunger. She'd eaten only a small piece of bread that morning, saving the rest for tomorrow, unsure when she'd have money for more. Horace Grimm paid her weekly, and she'd received her pittance just yesterday, most of which had immediately gone to her landlady for the room. As Clara gathered her cleaning supplies and prepared to leave through the back entrance, the way she always came and went, she heard raised voices from inside the saloon. This wasn't unusual. The Silver Spur saw its share of arguments, card games gone wrong, and drunken disputes. She'd learned to avoid these situations, to slip away before trouble could find her. But something about these voices made her pause. One of them was Grimm's, sharp and angry. The other was deeper, calmer, but carrying an edge of steel that suggested its owner wasn't a man to be trifled with. "I'm looking to hire someone," the deep voice said. "Your establishment came recommended as a place where I might find workers." "Looking for saloon girls?" Grimm's voice turned oily. "I've got the finest selection in Jefferson, I can assure you." "No." The single word cut through Grimm's pitch like a knife. "I need someone to manage my household. Cooking, cleaning, general housekeeping. I've been living like an animal for too long, and I'm tired of it." Clara found herself edging closer to the back door, curiosity overcoming caution. She could just glimpse the two men through the doorway that led to the main room. Grimm stood behind his bar, his florid face twisted in thought. The other man had his back to her, But even from this angle, Clara could see he was tall, broad-shouldered, wearing dusty trail clothes and a hat that had seen better days. "Housekeeping," Grimm repeated, stroking his oily mustache. "Well now, that's a different matter. Most respectable women in town wouldn't work for a bachelor. Not proper, you understand?" "I understand that propriety is often an excuse for prejudice," the stranger replied, a hint of impatience creeping into his voice. "I'm willing to pay fair wages for honest work. Surely you know someone who needs employment." Grimm's eyes flickered, and Clara saw calculation cross his features. "There is someone," he said slowly. "But I'd hate to lose her. She's been quite useful around here." Clara's breath caught. Was he talking about her? "I'll compensate you for the inconvenience," the stranger said, reaching into his pocket. Now, let's not be hasty." Grimm held up a hand. "The girl I'm thinking of, well, she's not much to look at, and she doesn't have much in the way of conversation. But she works hard, I'll give her that. Keeps to herself, doesn't cause trouble." The stranger's shoulders seemed to tighten slightly. "Is she honest?" "Far as I know, never caught her stealing, and Lord knows she's had opportunities. Reckon she's too scared to try anything like that." "Then she sounds exactly like what I need. May I meet her?" Grimm called out, his voice booming through the saloon. Clara Jensen, get in here." For a moment, Clara considered running. This felt like a trap, another situation where she'd be mocked or humiliated for someone else's amusement. But where would she run to? She had nowhere else to go, no other prospects. With trembling hands, she set down her bucket and walked through the doorway into the main saloon. The room was mostly empty at this early evening hour, just a few regulars nursing drinks in dark corners. The stranger turned as she entered, and Clara found herself looking up into a face that was weathered by sun and wind, but possessed of a quiet strength that made her heart skip strangely in her chest. He appeared to be in his mid-20s, with dark hair that curled slightly at his collar and eyes the color of weathered oak. There was something in those eyes, a loneliness that matched her own, though she couldn't have explained how she knew this. "Clara Jensen," Grimm said, waving a careless hand in her direction. "This is Yates Whitmore. He's looking for a housekeeper." Yates Whitmore removed his hat, an automatic gesture of respect that startled Clara. Men didn't remove their hats for women like her. "Miss Jensen?" he said, his voice gentler now than it had been when speaking to Grimm. "I own a ranch about 5 miles outside of town. It's not fancy, but it's mine, free and clear. I've been managing on my own for the past 2 years, and I'm afraid I've let the domestic side of things fall into disrepair. I'm looking for someone to keep the house, prepare meals, and generally make the place more livable. The work would be honest, and the pay would be fair. Room and board included naturally, along with wages of $15 a month. $15 a month. Clara's mind reeled. That was more than twice what Grimm paid her, and with room and board included, it would mean she could actually save money, maybe even dream of a future beyond day-to-day survival. But there was a catch. There was always a catch. "Why me?" Clara heard herself ask, her voice barely above a whisper. "You don't know anything about me." Something flickered in Yates Whitmore's eyes, something that might have been approval. "That's a fair question. The truth is, Miss Jensen, I don't have the patience to conduct a lengthy search. Mr. Grimm here suggested you're a hard worker who keeps to herself and causes no trouble. Those qualities are more valuable to me than fancy references or social graces. If you're willing to work hard and honestly, I'm willing to give you a chance." Clara looked down at her rough, reddened hands, at her worn dress that had been mended so many times the original fabric was barely visible beneath the patches. She thought about the small room where she slept, the walls so thin she could hear everything that happened in the seamstress shop below. She thought about the saloon girls who looked through her as if she were made of glass, about Grimm's calculating eyes and crude remarks, about the endless days of scrubbing floors that would never truly be clean. "When would I start?" she asked. "Tomorrow, if you're agreeable. I'll arrange to have your things collected and transported to the ranch." "I don't have much in the way of things," Clara admitted, feeling heat rise to her cheeks. "Then, it should be an easy move." Yates turned back to Grimm, pulling out a small leather purse. "For your inconvenience, as promised." Grimm's eyes gleamed as he counted the coins. "Always a pleasure doing business with you, Whitmore. Clara, you're released from your employment here, effective immediately. Don't expect to come crawling back if things don't work out." Clara barely heard him. Her mind was spinning with the sudden change in her circumstances, with the terrifying hope that maybe, just maybe, her prayers had been answered. She looked up at Yates Whitmore and found him watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read. "I'll meet you at the livery stable tomorrow at dawn," he said. "Bring whatever you have. We'll make the journey in the morning while it's still cool." Clara nodded, not trusting her voice. Yates settled his hat back on his head, nodded to both of them, and walked out of the saloon into the golden evening light. Clara stood frozen for a moment, trying to process what had just happened. "Well, don't just stand there gaping," Grim snapped. "Get your things and clear out. I'll need to find someone else to do the cleaning." Clara didn't need to be told twice. She hurried back to gather her bucket and rags, her heart pounding with a mixture of fear and excitement. As she made her way through the streets of Jefferson to her rented room, she noticed things she'd been too ground down to see before. The way the evening light turned the buildings gold and amber, the scent of honeysuckle blooming somewhere nearby, the sound of children laughing in a yard she passed. The world suddenly seemed full of possibility. That night, Clara packed her meager belongings into the single carpet bag she owned. 2 threadbare dresses, some undergarments she'd mended countless times, a hairbrush with half its bristles missing, and the small Bible that had been her mother's, the only thing she had left from her family. It all fit with room to spare, a testament to how little she'd accumulated in 19 years of life. She paid her landlady for the remainder of the week, even though she'd be leaving in the morning. The woman, a sour-faced widow named Mrs. Hutchins, didn't thank her, just pocketed the coins and told Clara not to forget to leave the key on the dresser. In the darkness of her room, Clara knelt beside the bed one last time and folded her hands in prayer. "Lord," she whispered, "I don't know if this is your answer or just another trial, but I'm grateful for the chance. Help me to be worthy of this opportunity. And if Yates Whitmore is a good man, help me to serve him well. If he's not, give me the strength to endure and the wisdom to survive. Amen." She climbed into bed but barely slept, her mind too active, her emotions too raw. What was she walking into? Yates Whitmore had seemed kind, respectful even, but men could hide dark natures behind pleasant facades. She'd be alone with him on a ranch 5 miles from town, vulnerable in ways that terrified her. Yet, what choice did she have? Return to Grimm's saloon? Try to find other work in a town that had already made clear there was no place for someone like her? No, she would take this chance, whatever it might bring. She'd survived this long, by being adaptable, by enduring. She would find a way to survive this too. Dawn arrived with a soft gray light that gradually brightened to gold. Clara dressed in her least worn dress, a faded blue calico that had once been pretty. She did what she could with her hair, braiding it and pinning it into a simple bun at the nape of her neck. Her reflection in the cracked mirror showed a face too thin, eyes too large, skin that had taken on a gray cast from months of poor food and little sunlight. She looked exactly like what she was, a woman beaten down by circumstance and hardship. The walk to the livery stable took only 10 minutes. Clara arrived to find Yates Whitmore already there, checking the harness on a sturdy-looking wagon hitched to 2 horses. He turned as she approached, and again that automatic gesture of respect as he touched the brim of his hat. "Good morning, Miss Jensen. I'm glad to see you. For a moment last night, I worried you might change your mind." "I gave you my word," Clara said quietly. Something in his expression shifted, softened. "So you did? Well then, let's get started. It's going to be a warm day, and I'd like to be back at the ranch before the heat gets unbearable." He helped her up onto the wagon seat with a courtesy that still surprised her, then climbed up beside her and took the reins. As they rolled out of Jefferson, Clara watched the town recede behind them. She felt no nostalgia, no sadness at leaving. Jefferson had been a place of survival, not home. She wondered if she'd ever have a place that truly felt like home. The road to Yates's ranch wound through pine forests and open meadows, following the contours of the East Texas landscape. This wasn't the flat, arid country people imagined when they thought of Texas. Here, the land was green and rolling, fed by ample rainfall and threaded with creeks and streams. Birds sang in the trees, and wildflowers bloomed along the roadside in brilliant purples and yellows. Yates drove in silence for the first mile, and Clara was grateful for it. She needed time to settle her nerves, to prepare herself for whatever awaited. But eventually he spoke, his voice easy and conversational. "I should tell you something about myself, Miss Jensen, so you understand what you're getting into. I came to Texas 3 years ago from Missouri. My family had a farm there, but after the war, things got difficult. My father died, and my mother followed not long after. My older brother inherited the farm, and there wasn't really room for me there anymore, not in terms of land or opportunity. I'd saved some money, enough to buy land of my own, so I came south looking for a fresh start. Clara listened, keeping her eyes on the road ahead. There was something in his voice, a thread of old pain that resonated with her own experiences. I bought 320 acres for a fair price from a man who was heading to California. The land's good, with water and timber, and I've spent the last 2 years building it up. I've got about 60 head of cattle now, some horses, chickens, a milk cow. It's not a grand operation, but it's mine, and it's growing. He paused, and Clara sensed he was choosing his next words carefully. The reason I mention all this is so you understand that I'm not some wealthy rancher looking for a servant to order around. I'm a working man trying to make something of himself. I'll treat you with respect, and I'll expect the same in return. The work will be hard sometimes, I won't lie about that, but I'll never ask you to do anything degrading or improper. You'll have your own room with a lock on the door, and I give you my word as a Christian man that you'll be safe under my roof. Clara's throat tightened with unexpected emotion. She'd been so focused on the practical aspects of survival that she'd almost forgotten what simple human decency sounded like. "Thank you," she managed to say. "That means more than you might know." Yates glanced at her, and for a moment their eyes met. In that brief connection, Clara felt something pass between them, an understanding, an acknowledgement of shared struggles and lonely hearts. Then he looked back at the road, and the moment passed, but it left something warm in Clara's chest, a tiny flame of hope she hardly dared acknowledge. The ranch, when they arrived, was modest but well maintained. The house itself was a simple wood structure, painted white with a covered porch running along the front. It was small, probably just 3 or 4 rooms, but it looked sturdy and well built. Behind it stood a barn, a chicken coop, and several other outbuildings. Split-rail fencing enclosed pastures where cattle grazed peacefully in the morning sun. "It's not much," Yates said, a note of apology in his voice, as he helped Clara down from the wagon. "But it's honest." Clara looked around, taking in the neat yard, the flowers someone had planted near the porch that had gone somewhat wild from lack of tending, the sound of chickens clucking contentedly in their coop. To her, it looked like paradise. "It's beautiful," she said simply. Yates looked surprised, then pleased. "Come on, I'll show you inside." The house was indeed small, consisting of a main room that served as both kitchen and living area, 2 bedrooms, and a small washroom that had been added to the back. The furnishings were simple but functional: a table with 4 chairs, a rocking chair near the fireplace, a cook stove that looked relatively new, shelves for dishes and supplies. Everything was covered in a layer of dust, and there were clear signs of the bachelor living in the dishes piled in the wash basin and the general air of neglect that came from a man too busy working to care about domestic order. "The bedroom on the left will be yours," Yates said, opening the door to reveal a small but clean room with a narrow bed, a dresser, and a chair by the window. "I've been using it for storage, but I cleared it out yesterday. There's a lock on the door as I promised. The key's in the lock." Clara stepped into the room and felt tears prick her eyes. It was twice the size of her room above the seamstress shop, with a real window that looked out over the pasture and let in beautiful morning light. The bed had a real mattress, not just a thin pallet, and there was a colorful quilt folded at its foot. "The quilt was my mother's," Yates said quietly from the doorway. "I thought you might have use for it." "I can't take your mother's quilt," Clara protested, even as her fingers longed to touch the beautiful stitching. "She'd want it used, not packed away in a trunk. Please, it would make me happy to know it's being appreciated." Clara nodded, not trusting her voice. She set her carpetbag down on the bed and turned to face him, squaring her shoulders. "Where would you like me to start?" Yates looked around at the dusty, cluttered house and gave a rueful laugh. "Honestly, wherever you think best. I have to head out to check on the cattle and mend some fence that's been giving me trouble. I'll probably be gone most of the day. Make yourself at home, get familiar with where things are. There's food in the larder, nothing fancy but enough to work with. Cook whatever you like for supper, and we'll eat around sunset if that suits you." "That sounds fine," Clara said. Yates hesitated, as if wanting to say something more, then simply nodded. "I'll leave you to it then. If you need anything and I'm not around, there's a bell on the back porch. Ring it if there's trouble." After he left, Clara stood in the middle of the main room and slowly turned in a circle, taking in the scope of the work ahead. It was daunting, but not in a discouraging way. This was honest work in a place that, despite the dust and disorder, felt more like a home than anywhere she'd been in years. She started by opening all the windows to let in fresh air, then swept the floors, chasing out months' worth of accumulated dirt. She tackled the dishes next, heating water on the stove and scrubbing until her hands ached. The wash basin water turned gray, then brown, then black before she was finished. She found cleaning rags and set to work on the surfaces, wiping down the table, the counters, the shelves. Dust motes danced in the sunlight streaming through the windows, and gradually the house began to transform. In the larder, she found flour, cornmeal, salt pork, beans, canned tomatoes, dried apples, and various other staples. It was a better stocked pantry than she'd expected, though everything was stored haphazardly, as if items had been shoved onto shelves without thought. She reorganized as she went, grouping like items together, checking dates on the canned goods, making mental notes of what was running low. For supper, she decided on something simple but hearty. Beans, slow-cooked with salt pork and onions, cornbread, and an apple cobbler made from the dried fruit she'd found. It was the kind of meal designed to stick to a man's ribs after a long day of physical labor, and she hoped Yates would appreciate it. As the afternoon wore on and the food cooked, filling the house with rich, savory aromas, Clara found herself humming. She couldn't remember the last time she'd hummed. There was something about this place, about the quiet broken only by birdsong and the occasional lowing of cattle, about the sense of purpose and dignity in the work she was doing, that soothed something deep in her soul. The sun was beginning to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, when Clara heard the sound of boots on the porch. Her heart jumped, nervous anticipation flooding through her. This would be the real test. Would Yates be pleased with her work? Would he be the kind man he'd seemed, or would his true nature emerge now that they were alone? The door opened, and Yates stepped inside, removing his hat and stopping dead in his tracks. His eyes widened as he took in the transformed room, the clean floors, the gleaming surfaces, the table set for supper with dishes that actually sparkled. The expression on his face was almost comical in its shock. "Miss Jensen," he said slowly, "I knew the place was a mess, but I didn't realize just how bad it had gotten until now. This is remarkable." Clara felt warmth rise to her cheeks. "I just did what needed doing. Supper's ready when you are. There's water warming on the stove if you'd like to wash up first." Yates moved to the wash basin, which Clara had filled with fresh water from the pump, and cleaned the dust and sweat from his face and hands. When he sat down at the table, Clara served him the beans and cornbread, then hesitated, unsure whether she was expected to eat with him or wait until he'd finished. Yates solved the dilemma by gesturing to the chair across from him. "Please sit. You've been working all day too. You must be starving." Clara sat, still somewhat uncertain, and filled her own plate with portions smaller than what she'd given him. They ate in silence for a few minutes, and Clara watched nervously as Yates took his first bites. His expression remained neutral at first, then changed to something like wonder. "This is delicious," he said, looking up at her with genuine appreciation. "I can't remember the last time I had a meal this good. You're a fine cook, Miss Jensen." "Thank you," Clara said quietly. "It's nothing fancy, just simple fare." "Simple fare prepared well is better than fancy food done poorly," Yates replied. He took another bite of cornbread and closed his eyes briefly. "You have no idea how tired I was of my own cooking." Clara allowed herself a small smile. As they ate, some of the tension she'd been carrying began to ease. The meal was peaceful, companionable even, and when Yates asked if she'd found everything she needed, his interest seemed genuine rather than critical. After supper, Clara served the apple cobbler, and Yates's face lit up like a child's at Christmas. "I haven't had cobbler since I left Missouri," he said. "My mother used to make it on special occasions." They talked a little as they ate dessert, carefully, both still learning the boundaries of this new relationship. Yates told her about the fence he'd mended, about a calf that seemed to be coming along nicely, about his hopes to expand the herd next spring. Clara found herself relaxing enough to share a little about her day, about finding his mother's recipe book tucked into a shelf and using it as a guide for the cobbler. When the meal was finished, Clara began clearing the dishes, but Yates stood and started helping, gathering plates and utensils. "You don't have to do that," Clara said, startled. "I can manage." "I know you can," Yates replied, "but it seems only fair to help, especially after you've been working all day to make this place livable." They washed and dried the dishes together, an oddly intimate domestic task that felt both comfortable and strange. Clara was acutely aware of his presence beside her, of the occasional brush of his arm against hers in the small space, of the faint scent of leather and hay and clean sweat that clung to him. When the kitchen was clean, Yates stepped back and ran a hand through his hair, looking suddenly awkward. "I suppose it's getting late. You must be exhausted. I'll say goodnight, Miss Jensen, and thank you again. You've done more than I had any right to expect." "Good night, Mr. Whitmore," Clara replied, and retreated to her room, closing the door behind her and turning the key in the lock. She leaned against the door, heart pounding for reasons she couldn't quite name. The day had been everything she'd hoped, and more. Yates was kind, respectful, appreciative of her work. The house, for all its initial disorder, was a good house, a home waiting to be properly tended. And yet, Clara felt a strange restlessness, an awareness that had nothing to do with her new employment and everything to do with the man in the next room. She changed into her nightgown and climbed into bed, pulling Yates's mother's quilt over her. It was soft and warm, lovingly made, and Clara traced the intricate stitching patterns with her fingers. What had Yates's mother been like? What would she think of her son hiring a stranger to keep his house? Would she have approved of Clara, or would she have seen her as the invisible, worthless creature everyone else seemed to see? These thoughts swirled through Clara's mind as she drifted towards sleep, mingling with the memory of Yates's face in the lamplight, the sound of his laugh when he'd tasted the cobbler, the unexpected gentleness in his calloused hands as he'd helped with the dishes. She'd prayed for someone who might see her, truly see her, and perhaps, just perhaps, her prayer was being answered in ways she hadn't dared imagine. The following days settled into a rhythm that Clara found deeply satisfying. She woke with the sun, dressed quickly, and started breakfast while Yates tended to the morning chores of feeding animals and checking on the stock. They ate together, conversations gradually becoming easier and more natural. Then Yates would head out for his day's work, and Clara would tackle the endless tasks of running a household. There was always something to do. Laundry that had been neglected for far too long, mending that had piled up. The kitchen garden that had gone to weeds and needed reclaiming. Clara threw herself into the work with an energy born of purpose and, if she was honest with herself, a desire to prove her worth, to show Yates that hiring her had been the right decision. Yates, for his part, seemed genuinely grateful for her presence. He never failed to compliment her meals, to notice the small improvements she made around the house, to express appreciation for clean clothes and mended socks. He treated her with a courtesy that Clara still found surprising, asking her opinion on domestic matters, respecting her decisions about household management, and never, ever making her feel like a servant. 2 weeks into her employment, Clara was hanging laundry on the line Yates had strung between two posts in the yard, when she noticed a rider approaching in the distance. She felt a flicker of alarm. They'd had no visitors since her arrival, and the isolation had felt safe, protective. A visitor meant intrusion, meant potential trouble. The rider resolved into a woman as she drew nearer, middle-aged and handsome, sitting her horse with practiced ease. She wore a respectable dress and a determined expression that made Clara nervous. This was someone of substance, someone who belonged to the world of proper society that had always excluded Clara. "Good morning," the woman called as she reined in her horse near the house. "I'm looking for Yates Whitmore." "He's out checking the south pasture," Clara replied, keeping her voice neutral. "He should be back around noon. Can I help you with something?" The woman dismounted and approached, studying Clara with sharp, assessing eyes. "I'm Margaret Sullivan. My husband, Thomas, owns the ranch adjacent to this one. We're Yates's nearest neighbors." "Clara Jensen," Clara said, offering a small nod. "Ah, so you're the new housekeeper we've been hearing about." Margaret's tone was carefully neutral, but Clara caught the undertone of curiosity and something that might have been disapproval. News travels fast in these parts. Folk are curious about why a bachelor would hire a young woman to live in his house. Clara felt her spine stiffen. She'd known this would come eventually. The judgment, the assumptions. "I keep Mr. Whitmore's house and prepare his meals, nothing more. The arrangement is entirely proper." "I'm sure it is," Margaret said, though her tone suggested she wasn't sure at all. Yates is a good man, everyone knows that. But appearances matter, Miss Jensen, especially for a woman in your position. People talk. People have always talked about me, Clara said quietly, usually when they bother to notice me at all. Something in Margaret's expression shifted, and the sharp edges softened slightly. I didn't come here to scold or judge. I came because Yates is a friend, and I worry about him. He's been alone too long, working himself to death trying to make this place succeed. If you're helping him with that, truly helping, then I'm grateful. But if there's anything untoward happening, anything that could damage his reputation, then we'll have a problem. There isn't, Clara said firmly. Mr. Whitmore has been nothing but respectful and honorable. I won't have anyone suggesting otherwise. Margaret studied her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. Fair enough. You've got spirit, I'll give you that. Most women in your position would be too cowed to speak up. She turned to remount her horse, then paused. The ladies' auxiliary at the church meets twice a month. We do quilting and discuss community matters. You'd be welcome to join us if you're interested. Clara was so surprised she almost didn't respond. I'm not sure that would be appropriate. Why not? You're a working woman, same as the rest of us in our own ways. And if you're living here with Yates, properly or not, it's important that people in the community get to know you, see that you're respectable. Think about it. With that, Margaret Sullivan mounted her horse and rode away, leaving Clara standing among the flapping laundry with her mind spinning. An invitation to join the ladies' auxiliary. It was such a small thing, and yet it represented something Clara had never had. Acceptance, inclusion, a place in a community. When Yates returned at noon, Clara told him about the visit while serving him lunch. She watched his face carefully, trying to gauge his reaction. Margaret means well, he said after a moment. She and Thomas have been good neighbors to me, but I'm sorry if she made you uncomfortable with her questions. She was protecting you, Clara said. I understand that. She's right that people will talk about the arrangement here. Yates set down his fork and looked at her directly. Do you regret taking this position? No, Clara said immediately. Not at all. This has been the best 2 weeks of my life, in longer than I can remember. I just don't want my presence here to cause problems for you. You won't, Yates said firmly. Anyone with sense can see that this is a proper business arrangement, and anyone without sense isn't worth worrying about. He paused, then added, But if you want to go to the ladies' auxiliary meetings, I think you should. It might be good for you to have friends, connections beyond this ranch. I wouldn't know how to act around those women, Clara admitted. I've never been part of anything like that. Just be yourself, Yates said with a slight smile. That's more than enough. The simple confidence in his words warmed Clara more than she wanted to admit. Yates believed she was enough, just as she was. It was a revolutionary thought for a woman who'd spent most of her life being told she was worthless. That evening, after supper was cleaned up, Clara found herself lingering in the main room instead of immediately retreating to her bedroom. Yates was sitting in the rocking chair near the fireplace, reading a book by lamplight. The scene was so domestic, so peaceful, that Clara felt a pang of longing for something she couldn't quite name. Mr. Whitmore, she said hesitantly. May I ask you something? He looked up from his book. Of course. And Clara, you don't have to be so formal. Yates is fine when we're here alone. The use of her first name sent a little thrill through her that she tried to ignore. Why did you hire me? Really, I mean. You could have found someone more experienced, someone with references and training. Why take a chance on someone like me? Yates closed his book and set it aside, giving her his full attention. Do you want the honest answer? Yes. He was quiet for a moment, seeming to gather his thoughts. When I walked into that saloon, I wasn't sure what I was looking for. I just knew I couldn't keep living the way I was, working myself into exhaustion and coming home to an empty, neglected house every night. Grimm suggested you, and I'll admit, my first thought was to refuse. You were clearly down on your luck, and I worried about what that might mean. But then, you walked into that room, and I saw something in your eyes. What did you see? Clara asked, her voice barely a whisper. Dignity, Yates said simply. Despite everything, despite the way Grimm dismissed you and the obvious hardship you'd endured, you carried yourself with dignity. And when I made you the offer, you didn't just jump at it. You asked why, you questioned it, you showed intelligence and caution. Those aren't qualities you can train into someone. They're either there or they're not. I figured anyone with that much dignity and sense would be someone I could trust. Clara felt tears prick her eyes and fought them back. I'm not used to people seeing anything good in me. Then they weren't looking properly, Yates said with quiet conviction. You're a remarkable woman, Clara Jensen. You've taken this neglected house and made it a home in just 2 weeks. You work harder than anyone I've ever known, and you do it without complaint. You're thoughtful, intelligent, and kind. Any fool can see that. You're not a fool, Clara said softly. No, Yates agreed, his eyes holding hers in the lamplight. I'm not. The moment stretched between them, charged with something neither of them was quite ready to name. Then Yates cleared his throat and picked up his book again, and Clara murmured goodnight and retreated to her room, her heart pounding. She lay awake for a long time that night, staring at the ceiling and trying to make sense of the feelings swirling through her. She'd been in Yates's employment for only 2 weeks, and already he'd become the center of her thoughts in a way that both thrilled and terrified her. She looked forward to his return each day, found herself listening for his footsteps, watching for his smile. When he complimented her cooking or noticed some small improvement she'd made, she felt a glow of pride and pleasure that went far beyond professional satisfaction. This was dangerous territory. Clara knew that. She was an employee, nothing more, and allowing herself to develop feelings for Yates could only lead to heartbreak. Men like him, good men with property and prospects, didn't fall in love with women like her. Women with no family, no dowry, no social standing. The best she could hope for was to continue her employment, to save her wages, and perhaps someday to have enough to start some small business of her own, to achieve independence and security. But even as she told herself this, even as she tried to be sensible and practical, Clara couldn't stop the slow blooming of hope in her heart. Because Yates didn't treat her like an employee. He treated her like an equal, like someone whose thoughts and opinions mattered. He saw her, truly saw her, in a way no one else ever had. And she was beginning to suspect that when she looked at him, she was seeing him in the same way. Not just as an employer, but as a man, strong and kind and achingly lonely. A man who deserved someone to care for him, to share the burden of building a life from nothing, to make this house a true home. Could she be that person? Dare she even dream of it? The summer weeks passed, each one bringing Clara and Yates into closer harmony. The work of running the ranch continued, demanding and relentless. But now there was a rhythm to it, a sense of partnership. Clara took over more responsibilities, tending the vegetable garden she'd reclaimed and expanded, caring for the chickens, even learning to milk the cow. Yates taught her with patience and good humor, never mocking her mistakes or making her feel inadequate when she struggled with unfamiliar tasks. Clara attended her First Lady's auxiliary meeting in mid-September, nervous and uncertain. Margaret Sullivan met her at the church with a warm smile that went a long way toward easing her fears. The other women were curious. Clara could feel their assessing gazes, but they were polite. And as the meeting progressed and Clara proved capable of holding her own in conversation and skilled with a needle, she felt some of the tension dissipate. After the meeting, a woman named Elizabeth Warren approached her. Elizabeth was perhaps 30, with kind eyes and a gentle manner. "It's nice to have a new face in our group," she said warmly. "I hope you'll come back." "I'd like that," Clara said, and meant it. As autumn approached, bringing cooler temperatures and the work of preparing for winter, Clara found herself increasingly at home on the ranch. She knew the rhythms of the days, the needs of the animals, the quirks of the stove, and the best ways to manage the household tasks. More than that, she felt a sense of belonging she'd never experienced before, and her feelings for Yates continued to grow, deepening with each shared meal, each moment of comfortable silence, each small kindness. She tried to hide it, to maintain professional boundaries, but it became increasingly difficult as she noticed signs that, perhaps, just perhaps, he was developing feelings for her too. The way his eyes would linger on her when he thought she wasn't looking, the extra effort he made to be present for meals even when work demanded his attention, the small gifts that started appearing, a pretty ribbon from the mercantile that matched her eyes, a book of poetry he thought she might enjoy, wildflowers left on the kitchen table one morning with no explanation. Clara cherished each of these gestures, even as she warned herself not to read too much into them. But hope, once kindled, was hard to extinguish. One evening in early October, after a supper of roasted chicken and fresh vegetables from the garden, Yates seemed restless, standing from the table and walking to the window to stare out at the darkening sky. "Clara," he said, then paused, as if uncertain how to continue. "There's a harvest dance in town next Saturday. The whole community comes together for it. I was wondering if you might like to attend." Clara's heart leaped into her throat. "With you?" "Yes, with me." He turned to face her, and there was vulnerability in his expression that she'd never seen before. "I know it might complicate things, people might talk, but I'd very much like to escort you to the dance, if you're willing." A dozen thoughts raced through Clara's mind. This would be a public declaration of sorts, an acknowledgement that she was more to Yates than just his housekeeper. It would invite scrutiny and gossip. It might damage both their reputations. But looking at Yates, at the hope and nervousness in his face, Clara knew she couldn't refuse. More than that, she didn't want to refuse. "I'd be honored to attend with you," she said softly. Yates's face broke into a smile that transformed his usually serious features into something boyishly handsome. "That's wonderful. I'm glad." The week leading up to the dance passed in a blur of nervous anticipation for Clara. She had only her 2 worn dresses, neither of which seemed appropriate for a social event. When she mentioned this uncertainty to Elizabeth Warren at the ladies' auxiliary meeting on Wednesday, Elizabeth immediately took charge. "I have a dress that would be perfect for you," she insisted. "My sister left it with me when she moved to Dallas, and it's never been worn. You're about her size, and the color would suit you beautifully." Clara protested, but Elizabeth wouldn't hear of it. 2 days before the dance, she arrived at the ranch with a dress that took Clara's breath away. It was a soft sage green with delicate cream lace at the collar and cuffs, simple but elegant. The kind of dress a respectable young woman might wear to a social gathering. "I can't accept this," Clara said, even as her fingers longed to touch the fabric. "Of course you can," Elizabeth said firmly. "It's just going to waste in my wardrobe. Please, I'd be so pleased to see it worn and appreciated." Clara tried it on in her bedroom and found it fit nearly perfectly, needing only a small adjustment to the hem. When she looked at herself in the small mirror above her dresser, she barely recognized her own reflection. In this dress, with her hair properly styled, she looked like a different person, not invisible Clara Jensen, the ignored maid, but someone worthy of being seen, of being noticed. On the evening of the dance, Clara dressed with trembling hands. She'd washed her hair that afternoon and spent extra time brushing it until it shone, then styled it in a way she'd seen in a ladies' magazine at the auxiliary meeting, swept up with a few soft curls framing her face. The dress transformed her, and with a touch of color in her cheeks from nervousness and a brightness in her eyes from excitement, she looked almost pretty. When she emerged from her bedroom, Yates was waiting in the main room, dressed in what were clearly his Sunday best clothes: clean trousers, a pressed white shirt, a vest, and a string tie. He looked handsome and slightly uncomfortable in the formal attire, but when he saw Clara, he went completely still, his eyes widening. "Clara," he breathed, "you look beautiful." Clara felt heat rise to her face, but she met his eyes steadily. "Thank you. You look very handsome yourself." They stood there for a moment, just looking at each other, and Clara felt the air between them change, charge with an awareness that had been building for weeks, but had never been so openly acknowledged. Yates cleared his throat and offered his arm. "Shall we?" The ride to Jefferson in the wagon was different from that first journey months ago. Then Clara had been frightened and uncertain, barely daring to hope. Now, sitting beside Yates with the evening breeze cooling her warm cheeks, she felt almost giddy with possibility. Their shoulders touched occasionally as the wagon swayed, and each contact sent little sparks of awareness through her. The dance was being held in the largest barn in Jefferson, which had been cleaned and decorated for the occasion. Lanterns hung from the rafters, casting warm light over the gathering crowd. A group of musicians was setting up in one corner, tuning fiddles and adjusting their instruments. The air smelled of hay and lamp oil and the perfume the ladies wore. As Clara and Yates entered, Clara felt the weight of many eyes turning toward them. She heard the whispers, saw the raised eyebrows and speculative looks. But Yates kept his hand at the small of her back, a gesture of protection and claim that steadied her nerves. Margaret Sullivan appeared almost immediately, her husband Thomas in tow. "Yates, Clara, I'm so glad you came," she said warmly, and Clara was grateful for the genuine welcome in her voice. "Clara, that dress is lovely on you." Other people approached, some curious, some friendly, some clearly disapproving. Yates handled it all with quiet confidence, introducing Clara to those she hadn't yet met, deflecting intrusive questions with polite firmness, making it clear without saying so directly that he considered Clara his equal and expected others to treat her with respect. When the music started, Yates turned to Clara and offered his hand. "May I have this dance?" Clara's heart hammered. "I don't really know how to dance," she admitted. "I've never had the opportunity to learn." "Then I'll teach you," Yates said simply. "Just follow my lead. I promise not to let you stumble." They moved on to the dance floor, and Yates guided her through the steps of a simple waltz. Clara was clumsy at first, too aware of the people watching, of her own inexperience, but Yates was patient, murmuring gentle instructions, his hand steady at her waist. Gradually, she began to relax, to let the music guide her, to trust Yates's lead. "There," he said softly, smiling down at her. "You're doing beautifully." As they turned across the floor, Clara felt as though she were floating. The world narrowed to just the two of them, to the music and the warmth of Yates's hand holding hers, to the way he looked at her as if she were the only person in the room. This was what she'd prayed for without knowing how to name it, not just safety or security or respect, but this. Being seen, being valued, being held like something precious. They danced several more dances, and between them, other men approached to ask Clara for a turn on the floor. She glanced at Yates, uncertain, and he nodded encouragingly, though she thought she saw a flicker of something that might have been jealousy in his eyes. She danced with Thomas Sullivan, who was gruff but kind, and with a young rancher named Peter Mitchell, who was overly chatty and kept stepping on her toes. But every dance, her eyes sought Yates across the room, and every time, she found him watching her. During a break in the music, Clara stepped outside for some fresh air. The barn had grown warm with so many bodies, and she felt slightly overwhelmed by the evening's intensity. She stood in the shadows beside the barn, taking deep breaths of cool October air, trying to settle her racing heart. "Miss Jensen." Clara turned to find a woman approaching from the opposite direction. She was perhaps 25, striking rather than pretty, with dark hair and assessing eyes. Clara recognized her as Dorothea Mitchell, sister to Peter, who had danced with Clara earlier, and daughter of one of Jefferson's wealthiest families. "Good evening," Clara said cautiously. Dorothea looked her up and down, not bothering to hide her scrutiny. "I thought I should speak with you, woman to woman. I've known Yates Whitmore for 2 years, since he first came to Jefferson. My family has been very welcoming to him, and I've made no secret of my interest in him as a potential husband." Clara's stomach tightened, but she kept her expression neutral. "I see. I don't think you do," Dorothea said coldly. "Yates needs a wife who can help him advance socially, who brings connections and resources to the marriage. He needs someone from a good family, someone respectable. You're his housekeeper. Surely you understand the difference." "What I understand," Clara said quietly, fighting to keep her voice steady, "is that Yates is a grown man, capable of making his own decisions about his life and his future. If he's interested in you, that's his choice to make. But it's not your place or mine to tell him what he needs." Dorothea's eyes flashed with anger. "You're very bold for a woman in your position. Do you really think a man like Yates would seriously consider marrying someone like you? Someone with no family, no dowry, no social standing? He's being kind, perhaps even feeling protective. But that's not love, that's charity." Each word was designed to wound, and they found their marks. Every insecurity Clara had ever felt about her situation, her worth, her prospects, rose up to choke her. But she'd survived worse than Dorothea Mitchell's cruelty, and she refused to let this woman see her bleed. "If Yates ever decides to marry, it will be his choice," Clara said with as much dignity as she could muster. "Not yours and not mine to influence. Now, if you'll excuse me, I should get back inside." She walked past Dorothea with her head high, but her hands were shaking. Back inside the barn, she found Yates talking with a group of ranchers near the refreshment table. He saw her immediately and excused himself, crossing to her side. "Is everything all right?" he asked, his eyes searching her face. "You look upset." "I just needed some air," Clara said, forcing a smile. "It's quite warm in here." Yates looked unconvinced, but before he could press further, the musician struck up another tune. "Dance with me?" he asked. As they moved together across the floor, Clara tried to push Dorothea's words from her mind, but they clung like burrs. Was this just charity on Yates's part? Was she fooling herself to think his kindness meant something more? She'd been so certain she'd seen feelings growing between them, but maybe she'd been seeing what she wanted to see, not what was really there. "Clara," Yates said softly, pulling her attention back to the present. "You've gone somewhere else. Talk to me. What happened?" Clara shook her head. "It's nothing, just someone reminding me of my place." Yates's jaw tightened. "Who?" "It doesn't matter." "It does to me." His hand tightened slightly on hers. "You're not beneath anyone, Clara. I thought you'd learned that by now." "I'm your housekeeper," Clara said, voicing the fear that had been planted by Dorothea's poison. "That's what I am. That's all I am." Yates stopped dancing, right there in the middle of the floor, not caring who was watching. He looked down at Clara with an intensity that made her breath catch. "No," he said firmly. "You're not. You haven't been for a long time, and I think you know that." "Then what am I?" Clara whispered. "You're the woman I wake up hoping to see every morning. You're the person I think about when I'm out working, wondering what you're doing, looking forward to coming home because you're there. You're the one who made a house into a home, not just with your work but with your presence. You're the woman I've been praying for, Clara, even before I knew I was praying for anyone." Clara's eyes filled with tears, and she couldn't tell if they were from joy or fear or overwhelming emotion. "Yates, I'm nobody. I have nothing to offer you." "You're wrong," he said, raising his hand to gently cup her face, unmindful of the dozens of eyes watching them. "You're everything. Your strength, your kindness, your dignity, your intelligence, the way you've transformed not just my home, but my life. Don't you see? I'm the one who has nothing to offer you but a small ranch and a lonely man's heart. But if you'll have them, they're yours. You've owned them for weeks now, whether you knew it or not." "I don't want your charity," Clara said, Dorothea's words echoing in her mind. "Good, because I'm not offering charity. I'm offering love, Clara. I love you. I've been falling in love with you since the first day you walked into my house and started making it a home. Since you hummed while cooking and organized my pantry and taught me what it meant to share a life with someone. I love you, and I'm asking you to marry me, to be my wife, not my housekeeper, to build this life with me as a partner." The barn had gone silent around them. Clara was dimly aware of this, aware that they were creating a scandal, aware that by Monday morning, all of Jefferson would be talking about this moment. But she couldn't bring herself to care, because Yates Whitmore was looking at her with such love, such raw honesty, that everything else faded into insignificance. "I love you too," she whispered, the words feeling both terrifying and liberating. "I've been so scared to admit it, so certain that I was reaching for something impossible. But I love you, Yates. I've loved you for weeks, and I was so afraid you'd never see me as anything more than the woman who cleans your house." "I see you," Yates said, his voice rough with emotion. "I've always seen you, from that first moment in the saloon, when you walked in with dust on your hands and wariness in your eyes, but your head held high. I saw you then, and I see you now, and I want to spend the rest of my life seeing you, loving you, building something beautiful together. Say yes, Clara. Please say yes." "Yes," Clara breathed. "Yes, yes, 1,000 times yes." Yates pulled her into his arms right there on the dance floor and kissed her. A kiss full of promise and hope, and the kind of love that transforms the ordinary into the miraculous. Around them, the crowd erupted into applause and cheers, but Clara barely heard them. She was lost in the kiss, in the feel of Yates's arms around her, in the overwhelming rightness of this moment. When they finally broke apart, both breathless and smiling through happy tears, Margaret Sullivan was there with a handkerchief and misty eyes. "I knew it," she said, laughing. "I told Thomas weeks ago that you two were perfect for each other." The rest of the evening passed in a blur of congratulations and well wishes. Even Dorothea Mitchell managed a tight smile of congratulation, though Clara saw the defeat in her eyes and felt a momentary sympathy. She knew what it was to want something desperately and believe it was beyond reach. As Yates drove Clara home under a canopy of stars, she leaned against his shoulder, still marveling at the turn her life had taken. 6 months ago, she'd been scrubbing floors in a saloon, invisible and hopeless. Now she was engaged to marry a good man who loved her, who saw her, who valued her for exactly who she was. "I can't believe this is real," she said softly. Yates kissed the top of her head. "It's real. You're real. We're real. And we're going to have a beautiful life together, Clara. I promise you that. They were married 3 weeks later in the small church in Jefferson, with Margaret and Thomas Sullivan standing as witnesses and most of the town in attendance. Clara wore the sage green dress that Elizabeth had given her, with wildflowers in her hair that Yates had picked that morning. She'd never felt more beautiful or more loved. The ceremony was simple but profound. When Yates slipped the ring onto her finger, a simple gold band that had belonged to his grandmother, Clara felt the weight of it as more than just metal. It was a symbol of everything she'd never dared to dream, of being chosen, of being loved, of finally belonging. Their first night as husband and wife was tender and sweet, full of nervous laughter and whispered endearments. Yates was gentle, patient, treating Clara like something precious. And when she fell asleep in his arms, she felt safe in a way she'd never experienced before. The years that followed were not without challenges. Ranching was hard work, and there were times when money was tight, when the weather didn't cooperate, when cattle got sick or markets fell. But Clara and Yates faced every challenge together, partners in the truest sense. Clara continued to attend the ladies' auxiliary, gradually becoming a valued member of the community. She made friends, real friends, women who appreciated her for who she was. Elizabeth Warren became particularly close, and their families often shared Sunday dinners and holiday celebrations. The ranch grew steadily under their combined efforts. Yates expanded the herd and improved the breeding stock, while Clara managed the household finances with a careful eye that ensured they always had a small cushion for emergencies. They added on to the house, building a larger kitchen and a proper parlor, turning the small structure into a real home. 2 years after their marriage, Clara gave birth to a son. They named him William, after Yates's father, and he was a healthy, loud baby with his father's dark hair and his mother's gray eyes. Yates wept when he first held his son, overwhelmed with joy and gratitude. "Thank you," he whispered to Clara, kissing her forehead as she rested in their bed, exhausted but happy. "Thank you for this gift, for our son, for our life together." "Thank us both," Clara said softly. "We built this together." William was followed 3 years later by a daughter they named Sarah, who had Clara's blonde hair and Yates's easy smile. Then 2 years after that came another son, James, who was quieter than his siblings but deeply thoughtful, always watching and learning. As the children grew, the house filled with laughter and noise and the beautiful chaos of family life. Clara sometimes paused in her daily work, surrounded by the evidence of her full, rich life, and marveled at how far she'd come from that desperate girl scrubbing saloon floors. One evening, when William was 8 and helping his father with the evening chores, Sarah was 5 and chattering nonstop about the new foal that had been born that morning, and James was 3 and toddling around getting into everything, Clara stood on the porch and watched her family. Yates saw her standing there and walked over, slipping an arm around her waist. "What are you thinking about?" he asked. "About prayers," Clara said softly. "About how I used to pray for someone who would see me, who would value me. I thought I was asking for so little, but you gave me everything." Yates turned her to face him, his expression serious. "You gave me everything, Clara. Before you came into my life, I was just existing, working toward goals that meant nothing because I had no one to share them with. You taught me what it means to have a home, a real home filled with love and laughter. You gave me children, a family, a purpose beyond just survival. I'm the one who received everything." "Then maybe," Clara said, smiling up at him, "we're both exactly what the other needed." "That's not maybe," Yates said, pulling her close. "That's certainty. That's fact. That's the greatest blessing of my life." As the sun set over their land, painting the Texas sky in brilliant shades of orange and gold, Clara leaned into her husband's embrace and felt profound gratitude. She'd been the maid everyone ignored, the invisible woman no one saw. But Yates had seen her, had recognized her worth when no one else had. And together, they'd built something beautiful from nothing but hard work, faith, and love. The years continued to pass, bringing their share of joys and sorrows. Yates's brother visited from Missouri, reconciling after years of distance. Clara's landlady from Jefferson passed away, and Clara was surprised to find she felt genuine sadness for the difficult woman who'd never shown her kindness. The ranch continued to prosper, becoming one of the most successful operations in the county, The children grew healthy and strong. William showed his father's aptitude for ranching, often riding out with Yates to check on the cattle, even when he was barely tall enough to reach the stirrups. Sarah inherited her mother's domestic skills, but also displayed a fierce independence and intelligence that promised she'd make her own mark on the world. James, quiet and observant, revealed a gift for drawing, spending hours sketching the animals and landscapes around him. When William was 15, a drought struck East Texas, testing every rancher's resilience. The creeks ran low, pastures turned brown, and cattle grew thin. Many smaller operations failed, their owners forced to sell out to larger ranches or abandon ranching altogether. But Yates and Clara had been careful over the years, saving money and making wise decisions. And they had enough reserves to purchase feed and keep their herd alive. More than that, they opened their home to neighbors who were struggling. Margaret and Thomas Sullivan, now aging and finding the work of their ranch increasingly difficult, were invited to dinner regularly, leaving with baskets of food Clara insisted they take. When a young family with 3 children lost their home, Yates and Clara took them in for 2 months until they could get back on their feet. "We have more than enough," Clara said, when Yates worried they were stretching their resources too thin. "Remember what it was like to have nothing, to be desperate. We can't turn away from people in need." Yates pulled her into his arms, overwhelmed with love for his wife's generous heart. "How did I get so lucky?" he asked. "It wasn't luck," Clara said firmly. "It was prayer, mine and yours. It was 2 lonely people finding each other and choosing to build something together. It was work and faith and love. That's not luck, Yates. That's blessing." The drought eventually broke, the rains returned, and life resumed its rhythms. The family that Clara and Yates had helped moved to a small farm they purchased with savings accumulated during their stay, and they remained close friends, their children growing up alongside William, Sarah, and James. As Clara approached 40, she discovered she was pregnant again, a surprise that both delighted and worried her. She was older now, and pregnancies carried more risk. But Yates was attentive and careful, and when their 4th child arrived, a daughter they named Grace, both mother and baby were healthy. Grace was aptly named, a sweet-natured child who seemed to bring joy wherever she went. She had Yates's dark hair and Clara's smile, and she completed their family in a way that felt ordained. By the time William was ready to take over most of the ranch operations, Yates was in his 50s, still strong, but happy to step back and let his son shoulder more responsibility. Sarah had married a kind young man named Daniel, who worked as a school teacher, and they had built a home on a portion of the ranch land that Yates deeded to them. James had gone to Dallas to study art, his talent recognized by a teacher who'd encouraged him to pursue formal training. Grace, at 10 years old, was still at home, bright and curious and beloved. One evening, with the house quieter than it had been in years, Clara and Yates sat on their porch watching the sunset. They held hands, comfortable in the silence that came from decades of knowing each other. "Do you remember that first day?" Clara asked softly. "When you drove me out here and I thought this place was paradise? I remember thinking you were either very kind or very desperate to find anything about this place beautiful," Yates said with a chuckle. "I was both," Clara admitted, "but I was also right. It was paradise, or at least the beginning of one. Not because of the land or the house, but because of you. Because you saw me when no one else did." "I saw you because you were impossible not to see," Yates said, raising her hand to his lips and kissing it gently. "You were the answer to prayers I didn't even know I was praying." They sat in companionable silence for a while longer, watching the sky fade from gold to purple to deep blue. In the distance, they could hear William calling to his own children, Sarah's grandchildren who visited regularly. The ranch that Yates had built alone had become a family compound, a place of love and legacy. "We did well," Clara said softly. "Didn't we?" "We did magnificently," Yates replied. "We took 2 broken, lonely people and built a family, a home, a life worth living. That's not just doing well, Clara. That's creating something miraculous." As the first stars appeared in the Texas sky, Clara leaned her head on her husband's shoulder and felt complete contentment. She'd been the maid everyone ignored, the invisible woman scrubbing floors in a saloon. But Yates Whitmore had seen her, had recognized her worth, had offered her not just employment, but love, partnership, and a life beyond her wildest dreams. They'd built their paradise together, one day at a time, through hard work and unwavering devotion. They'd raised children who were good and strong and kind. They'd created a home that welcomed not just family, but anyone in need. They'd loved each other through prosperity and hardship, through the everyday moments and the extraordinary ones. And as they sat together on that porch, hands clasped and hearts intertwined, both Clara and Yates knew with absolute certainty that they'd found exactly what they'd been searching for all along. Not wealth or status or ease, but love, true and deep and lasting. The kind of love that transforms invisible maids into cherished wives, lonely cowboys into devoted husbands, and simple houses into homes filled with joy and laughter and grace. The years ahead would bring more changes. William would have 3 children of his own, taking over the ranch completely when Yates finally retired in his 60s. Sarah and Daniel would welcome 2 sons who inherited their father's love of learning and their grandfather's work ethic. James would return from Dallas with a wife he'd met at art school, an intelligent woman named Catherine who appreciated and supported his talent. They'd settle in Jefferson, where James would open a studio and teach art to local children. Grace would grow into a beautiful young woman with her mother's compassionate heart, eventually marrying a young veterinarian and staying close to home, her children growing up on the same land where their grandmother had found salvation. Through it all, Clara and Yates remained the center of their growing family, the foundation upon which everything else was built. They aged gracefully together, their love deepening with each passing year. The physical passion of their youth mellowed into a profound companionship, but the spark between them never fully dimmed. Yates could still make Clara blush with a well-timed compliment. Clara could still make Yates laugh with her dry observations about life. They celebrated their 50th wedding anniversary surrounded by children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren, a gathering of more than 40 people, all connected through the love between Clara and Yates. Margaret Sullivan, now widowed and frail but still sharp-minded, attended and gave a toast that brought tears to many eyes. "I knew from the first moment I saw these 2 together that they were meant for each other," Margaret said, raising her glass. Yates was a good man who needed someone to share his life with. Clara was a strong woman who needed someone to recognize her strength. Together, they built something beautiful, and all of us here are evidence of that beauty. To Clara and Yates, to 50 years of love and partnership and devotion. As everyone echoed the toast, Clara looked around at the faces surrounding her, her children, grown and successful in their own right, her grandchildren, full of promise and potential, her great-grandchildren, the newest generation carrying forward the legacy she and Yates had built, and at the center of it all, Yates, still handsome despite the silver in his hair and the lines on his face, looking at her with the same love she'd seen in his eyes 50 years ago in a barn in Jefferson, Texas. That night, after everyone had gone home and the house was quiet again, Clara and Yates sat on their porch once more, a ritual they had maintained throughout their marriage. The stars were brilliant overhead, undimmed by city lights, and the air was soft with the promise of spring. Tired? Yates asked, knowing these big gatherings, while joyful, took a toll on Clara's aging body. "Happy tired," Clara replied. "The best kind of tired." 50 years, Yates mused. It's gone by in the blink of an eye and lasted forever all at the same time. "That's what a good life does," Clara said. "It makes time meaningless because every moment is exactly where you want to be." Yates stood and offered Clara his hand. "Dance with me?" "There's no music," Clara protested, even as she took his hand and let him pull her to her feet. "There's always music when I'm with you," Yates said, pulling her close and beginning to sway gently. They danced on the porch under the stars, 2 people who'd found each other against all odds and built a love that had withstood every test. As they moved together in the darkness, Clara thought about that desperate girl who used to pray for someone to see her, to value her, to love her. She wished she could go back and tell that girl that prayers are answered, sometimes in ways more beautiful than we can imagine, and that the life waiting for her would be filled with more love, more joy, and more blessings than she ever dared to dream. But that girl was gone, transformed through love and time into the woman Clara had become, strong, confident, cherished, and deeply, profoundly grateful for every moment of the life she'd built. With the cowboy who had hired the maid, everyone ignored and discovered the woman he'd been praying for. When Yates passed away peacefully in his sleep at the age of 79, with Clara holding his hand and his children gathered around his bed, his last words were, Thank you for seeing me too, Clara. Thank you for loving me. Clara lived another 5 years after Yates died, surrounded by family who loved her fiercely and ensured she wanted for nothing. She spent those years telling stories to her great-grandchildren about their great-grandfather, about the ranch's early days, about the love story that had created their family. She showed them the sage green dress she'd worn to that fateful dance, carefully preserved, and the simple gold ring she still wore on her finger. When Clara finally joined Yates, passing peacefully on a warm spring morning with wildflowers blooming outside her window and her children around her, she went with a smile on her face and absolute certainty that she'd lived a life of profound meaning and love. At her funeral, William stood to speak, his voice thick with emotion. My mother used to tell us that she'd been invisible before she met our father, that people looked right through her as if she weren't there. But Dad saw her. He recognized the strength, the dignity, the beauty that everyone else missed. And together, they built something that will last long after both of them are gone. Every person in this room exists because a lonely cowboy decided to hire a maid nobody else valued and had the wisdom to recognize her as the answer to his prayers. That's our legacy. That's what they gave us, the knowledge that everyone has value, that everyone deserves to be seen, and that love, real love, can transform the world. As William spoke, Clara's great-granddaughter Grace, named for her great-grandmother's youngest daughter, held a baby girl in her arms. This newest addition to the family had been born just weeks before Clara passed, and in accordance with family tradition, she'd been named Clara, carrying forward the name of the woman who had started it all. Little Clara fussed slightly, and Grace rocked her gently, looking down at the tiny face with overwhelming love. "Your great-great-grandmother would have adored you," she whispered. "She would have told you that you're never invisible, that you're precious and valued and loved beyond measure. And we'll all make sure you always know that, just like she taught us." The ranch remained in the family, passed down through generations, each one adding their own chapter to the story Clara and Yates had begun. The original house, lovingly maintained, became a landmark, a testament to the enduring power of love and faith, and two people who refused to give up on their dreams. And sometimes, on quiet evenings when the sun sets over the East Texas landscape in brilliant shades of gold and amber, family members gathering on that old porch can almost feel the presence of Clara and Yates, still together, still watching over the family they created, still dancing under the stars to music only they can hear. Their story became legend in Jefferson, told and retold through generations. The cowboy who hired the maid everyone ignored and discovered the woman he'd been praying for. It was a love story for the ages, proof that sometimes the most profound prayers are answered not with grand miracles, but with simple moments of recognition, when one lonely soul sees another and chooses love over indifference, connection over isolation, faith over fear. And in the end, that was enough, more than enough. It was everything.